Catapult pancakes lobbed at me. Syrup and butter, they are killing we.
Converted man here. The problem with God. Problems. Problems? More than one. Oh, okay. Apologists like to say a lot of things. Like that God is outside of space-time. Of course, if God's outside time, then there's no before, during, or after. God can't say, I'll make the universe now, or I'll make the universe always, because if you have no time, then there's no when. And as far as there being no space, space is a dimension of up, down, left, right, forward, backwards. It's a thing that you occupy. So if there's no space, you weren't anywhere. Where the bleep are you? Nowhere. There's no space. There's nowhere for you to be. I've also heard that God has power. But what does that mean? The ability to do something or act in a particular way? The capacity to direct or influence? Supplying power, like mechanical energy? Or to move or travel with great speed or force? Well, there's no where to move to. There's no when to move. So, is it the ability to direct or influence something? How would that work? There's nothing there. There's no where there. There's no when there. So, it's the ability to do something? Well, what kind of power is that? How does that power function? And where does it come from? And entropy exists for everything we know about. So, there's no perpetual motion, no free lunches. So, does this power negate or ignore those things? And if so, then it's not the sort of power that we know of. So then the word's not even the right word. What about the word immaterial? That's often applied to God. Of course, that just means unimportant under the circumstances or irrelevant. They can't mean that. They must mean the spiritual rather than physical. What does that mean? Well, the spiritual is relating to or affecting the human spirit or soul, as opposed to material or physical things, or relating to religion or religious belief. So spirit is spirit. But what's spirit? And soul doesn't really resolve the problem either, because again, that just seems like one giant circular definition. The soul is the soul. What is it? It's a soul. But what is it? It's still a soul. Okay. Well, how does that work? What is it? What's the thing? God being beyond the universe. The bleep? Universe is what we know about. What do you mean beyond it? Outside the universe. How? What? What is that? What do you mean outside? What does that even mean here? Is there an outside of the universe? Or maybe not. Because the universe is just expanding into space, which is also itself. So there is no outside. Of course, then, we have to also address the problem of which God we're talking about. Are we talking about Yahweh? Or Asherah? No. We're not talking about those gods. We're talking about a different God, right? Or which God are we talking about? Exactly. There's so many gods to choose from. And the idea that your God happens to be the actual God is an interesting idea. It's so convenient for you that you happen to pick the right God to believe in. All the other gods, past or present or future, aren't real except for yours. Yeah, sure. Okay. Now, I can imagine that an apologist might come up with answers to these sort of questions and problems, because humans are very imaginative beings. Of course, supporting those answers with citations and data or logical arguments would be a whole nother matter in and of itself. And we don't have those sort of logical arguments. We have people pretending that they have logical arguments, but they don't. There's no empirical evidence, no repeatable tests for these things, and, well, that's a problem. It's a problem that should make us skeptical, but many people aren't. Lots of people believe in lots of different things, and God is one of those things that people believe in. Why? Well, lots of different reasons. But if these problems are unresolved for God, and all the questions that we have about reality as we understand it are, some of them are resolved and some of them aren't, but you're going to say that God's the answer to some of those problems, but then you don't have answers for these problems with God, well, then don't we have to appeal to a bigger God to explain those problems away? If we're willing to fill in our ignorance with God every time, then shouldn't we fill in our ignorance about how God works with a super mega God? And if not, then why fill in your ignorance with anything other than the actual answer, which is we don't know? Why is that so frightening to so many? Religions say that they have the answer. They assert with the authority of God that they have the answer. And science doesn't do that. Materialists, naturalists don't do that. Broadly speaking, atheists don't do that. We're more humble to admit that we don't have the answers. But of course, it's important to note that even if you don't know what the answer is, you can certainly know what the answer is not. And the answer doesn't appear to be any of these gods thus far. But maybe there's a God out there. We just haven't figured out what that is or how that works. We haven't found it yet. We haven't located it. And until we do, and unless we do, shouldn't we then give pause to our assertions about gods and say perhaps they're just a belief that humans hold? And although you may find that belief to be valuable and useful, perhaps you should temper that belief with reason and logic and admit that it is not something that you can argue for, but simply believe in. That faith is all you have. You don't have facts. You don't have evidence. You don't have proof. I'd love to see the religious become more honest like that. There are a few out there, but I'd like to see them grow in numbers, and perhaps they will turn into non-theists, or at least their religion will become far more reasonable. Until then, well, all I have is, I suppose, some hope. Also, a finite despair, but that's a whole nother thing. I think I wrote a book about that. You should probably check that out. Even if you don't have the answers, that doesn't necessarily mean you know what the answer